Wow, that looks awful. I had to knock down the screen resolution because it was cutting off left and right. I work for StrongLoop, so I just wanted to put up our website real quick and just plug, that I work for StrongLoop and we're awesome and you should go check us out. But I'm going to move right on to talking about Grunt. And again, this looks awful because I'm zooming in like crazy. But specifically what I'm talking about is creating custom Grunt tasks. A lot of people have used, who uses Grunt right now in their dev process? Yeah, it's a good number of you. And you all know that it runs on Node. How many of you have created your own custom Grunt tasks? Far fewer. So the important thing to remember about Grunt is that it's just Node, and Grunt tasks are just very simple Node modules. So I'm going to tell you about how to use the Grunt API, specifically using the actual Grunt API, not necessarily how to do anything specifically in Node. But then we're going to do some code. So I will show you the repo URL at the end, and you can get the actual task that I wrote. But we're going to cover some of these topics. I'm not going to go to that because I'm actually going to show you, and I only have 20 minutes, and I'm doing quite a bit. So here's our Grunt file. It's pretty darn simple. We have one task that we're going to build first, and then we're going to build a second task on top of that to more or less demonstrate some of the stuff we can do with custom Grunt tasks. So you can see I've got a troll task here, and it's got 3 different targets: Linux, Windows, and other. And we're going to be using this task as a means to an end for our other tasks. So first of all it's going to do is print out a nice little message to the console based on the target that's being run. So over here I've got in this tasks folder on the left a module in a file called foo.js. And the reason that it's called foo.js, you'll recall the task name is actually troll, is just to demonstrate that it doesn't matter what you call the file. What matters is what you register your task as. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to hit the Grunt API. This is just a Node module, right? So what happens is Node is going to include this file, and it's going to pass into the exports function the Grunt API. So you get access to the Grunt API that way. You don't have to actually require it or pull it in any way. In my Grunt file at the bottom, you'll see that I just use the grunt.task.loadTasks function, and I specify a directory. Grunt's going to go through that directory and just require every JavaScript file inside of it. And it's going to attempt to call the function that is exported from that module. So again, this is just a Node module. You could literally do absolutely anything you want to do in here. Grunt is going to require this module and then call the function that's exported. That's it. That's all that happens. There is no magic here. So what we do in here is we're actually going to call, a function on the Grunt API called register multitask. Now you might have seen register task. You've probably seen register multitask. I'm using multitask specifically here and not register task because multitask gives us a little extra feature functionality inside of your task function. If you use register task, you have to do a lot of stuff manually. Multitask gives you a little helpful stuff. It just requires you to do a couple things, which I'll mention. First argument there is the name of our task. So that's troll. Notice again, file name is foo. You can call it whatever you want. The task name is whatever you call register multitask with. You give it a description and a function. And technically it does get a couple of arguments, but you really don't care about those. The arguments are quite utterly useless. And the reason that they're useless is because we have a good bit of functionality built onto this, the context that that the function gets called with. So this function is what's going to get executed when someone actually executes your task on the command line. In our case, what we're going to do is we're going to say if it's awesome, really simple, we're going to go to the Grunt log and write out a line. So this is the first bit, or I guess the second bit of the Grunt API, the first being register multitask. The second bit is that you want to use the Grunt log. You can just do console.log here. That will work just fine. However, using the Grunt log will give you a little added functionality, which I'm going to get into a little bit later. So I want to say, Linux is awesome, or whatever the task, whatever the specific target happens to be. So I want to use the target name here. I'll get to that in a minute. But if it's not awesome, then I'll just print out that it's not so awesome or something silly like that. Which is funny since I'm on a Windows 8 machine right now. Isn't that great? Okay. So that's the basic task, but the question is, how do I get this awesome data point, and how do I get the name of the task? That'd be kind of nice. So there's a couple of different ways that you can do this. You can actually go straight to the Grunt API and we can call something like this. And we can say, hey, give me the troll.linux.awesome config option. And that is really awful. And because you have to know the name of the task, the name of the target, and it's not extensible whatsoever. So instead, because we're using a multitask, I can actually do this .data. So what does this .data give you? Well, over in our grunt file, it's going to give you the stuff in here. So in my case, it's that target's options. Again, I'm not going over all the basics of grunt, like how you pass in options, stuff like that. It's really not that difficult. I would recommend you do go to the getting started page of the Grunt website if you're not familiar. If I had any options in here, it would also give me the options, but basically it's everything that's inside of this thing, including any options and overridden options. So I can just go to this.data.awesome, and that will actually give it to me, instead of going straight to the grunt config API. However, if you need to set config, you can also use grunt.config. So you can actually set config for any other task. So I could actually do grunt.config call that function and set some other task .target param to foo. And you can actually set the config for any other task you want. Very fun. Okay. So now I've got this thing in here, and the only thing that I have left is I want to switch out this thing for the name of the actual target for this task. Because if we look at our config, Linux is awesome, Windows isn't, other is, well, we're not sure yet. Right? So that's easy. I can just do this .target. Ooh, that didn't work. So let's see this working before we move on. So really simple. It just looks at the target and prints it out. And if I go over to my console-like object anyway, and I do grunt, sure, that's probably not big enough for using. I actually don't know how to increase the size on this. Can you all see that? All right, good. So grunt troll Linux, and Linux is awesome, and grunt troll Windows, and Windows is not so awesome. Everybody good there? Okay. So that's just a couple of little things on the Grunt API. Go into the log, but let's take that a bit further. What if we had, we wanted to, so in our case, Linux and Windows, we want that to be auto-detected. We want to be able to run grunt troll from any environment and have it detect that environment and automatically do that. So there's actually a lot of tasks where you might need to do something slightly different on different operating systems. However, you have to build that into your task, and if you're using someone else's task, how are you going to add that? Well, it's really easy. We can just write a little wrapper task, and that's what we're going to do. We're going to write a little OS detect wrapper task, and then we can write a troll target in there, and we don't really need any config for this. In the final product that I have on the GitHub repo, you can go to that and you can get the config and see how I've actually configured it to be a lot more extensible. For our purposes, I'm just going to leave it like this. For a multitask, you must have a task and target defined in the config. This is the big difference between register task and register multitask in terms of what you have to do. You have to have both these things, even if you don't use the config. So one little downside to using multitask, but the benefits, I think, outweigh that. So there's our OS detect config. There's nothing in it. Here's our file, and again, this is just a node module. So I've already got the register multitask in here. You can see it's called OS detect and matches the name of the file, but doesn't need to. I've got this var task to run, and because this is just a node module, I've got process.platform because I have access to everything in node. I could do a var x equals require whatever, and I could require whatever node package I want to. I can add dependencies. I can do whatever I want. Inside of here, I'm going to add a nice little log statement that says, hey, I detected the OS, and there's what it is. And then you can see I'm just testing the OS and saying, okay, well, if it's this, if it's Linux, then I want to run troll Linux. If it's Win32, I want to run troll Windows. And if it's Darwin, which is OS X, if you're not familiar, then I want to run troll other. But I'm going to have to do something a little special there. And you can see at the bottom, I do a grunt log, hey, I added a task to the queue. But you can see I don't actually run the task. I just set it to a variable. So this comes to the next bit of the API, which is the run method of the task API. So I can do grunt.task.run. And then I can just pass in whatever I want. In this case, I want task to run. Now, one big caveat here. When you do this, you are not telling Grunt to run that task right now. You are telling Grunt to queue that task up to be run in order. And any other tasks that are already queued come before that. very important. You cannot, right now in Grunt, tell it to immediately run this task right now. There isn't a way to do that. You can only queue them. So keep that in mind, but that should be fine because all your tasks should be idempotent and not have to worry about that. So now I'm able to run this task, so let's check it out. Let's see what we get. So I'm going to come over here and I'm going to do grunt os detect, right? So it's going to run troll for me. And in my case, I need to do that. And so you can see it detects that I'm on Windows. And you can see it says success added task to queue troll Windows. And then it actually ran troll Windows. Yeah? Okay, so let's fix this up because it's really quite ugly. First of all, we really don't need this message all the time, do we? Using this message all the time is kind of silly. This is more of a verbose option, right? So that's easy. We can just switch log to verbose. It's just a wrapper around the grunt log, and it allows you to eliminate that message unless the user does -- verbose. So let's clear this so we get up to the top, and I can do grunt os detect troll, and if I do -- well, let's not do -- verbose. And what you'll see is I got the success added to the task, but I did not get the OS detected. And if I do -- verbose, we're actually going to get a bunch of other information because unfortunately you can't say, verbose only for my task. So if we look down in here, there's detected OS as Win32. So it'll only show up on the verbose option. So that's one bit. Here's the other bit. What if I want to test this? I'm on Windows. How can I ever test this to make sure that Darwin actually matches? Well, it's okay. Right now, I've got process.platform here. But what if I allow the user to pass that in as a command line option? Great. Grunt. It's the German version. Grunt.option or process.platform, and you just grab, let's say, OS. So now I can pass in the OS as a command line option, or if that doesn't exist, it will use process.platform. Save that up, come back over here, grunt os detect troll -- So you still have to use -- but when you look it up, you don't use the -- By the way, if you just do this, then the feature or the option is true, which of course won't help us because we don't want true, we want the value. So we'll do equals, in our case, Linux. But you can also do that with equals quotes or without the equals. It supports all of those different CLI option formats. And you can see it says now Linux is awesome, not Windows is not so awesome as we had before. So accessing CLI options, super easy. We already did command line options, so I'm not going to go into that, but I do want to talk a little bit more about this log. Write line's fine, but sometimes you want a little more option to it, so maybe we do an OK message there. That didn't print. Oh yeah, it did. So when you look at the success line, you see the green chevron there. So that's all it does for you, is gives you a nice little green chevron there. But the idea is that you can have different messages here. Maybe with this other one, we want to say, well, look, OS X is not actually supported. So what we can do here is access the fail API. This is another wrapper around log, but adds a little extra functionality than verbose, a little different functionality. What we're going to do is we're going to warn people. We're going to say OS X is not supported. And when you do that, it's going to print out a nice warning message, but it's also going to stop Grunt from continuing. And this is good because we don't support Grunt. So if I run this now with Darwin as my oops, that's not going to work. With Darwin, you can see it says warning, OS X is not supported, use -- force to continue. You've probably all seen this message before. Okay, well, let's try using -- force to continue. Well, that didn't help. It added troll other, so it said other is not so awesome. That's great, but that doesn't really do what we want it to do. What we want it to do is print out that OS X is awesome, or not so awesome as the case may be. So we don't want this to actually continue unless they tell us to, and so or unless they use force. So when you use warn, it's going to stop process. You use -- force, it will continue past that line. Line what was that, 22 there. So if you don't use -- force, then it stops at that line, and that's great. But you need to make sure that you do other things in there, like other messages, how they should proceed, things like that. if they use dash dash force, you've got to know that it's going to go past this message, right? But if you look, it actually prints out that message still. You see it at the top? Warning, OS X is not supported. It still prints the message. So what you might want to do is say something like what we did before. Whoops. If grunt.option, or rather if not, grunt.option force. So if they don't give us the force option, then we'll give the warning. And if they do give the force, then we'll keep going. So now maybe we want to say, okay, well, I want to change this. I want to go to the config, and I want to change, and this is something where you'd really want to abstract this out, right? But I want to change grunt or troll.other.name. So in our case, we were doing the target, this .target, but we could do something like var name equals this.data.name or this.target. So now we get a little more variability there. It'll use the target if it doesn't get a name otherwise. Yeah? So grab the name off the data object or use the target if we don't get one. So now I'm going to change the name of that task to OSX, and just for funsies, to appease some of my colleagues, I will change awesome to true for OSX, even if it's a lie. Okay, so now I come in here and I can run grunt os darwin force it, and I'll get OSX is awesome because I've switched those parameters at runtime. So this is a way you can change the config for another task and then queue up that task using the Grunt API. Let's see, what did I miss? Oh, async, yeah. So how much time do I have?
Done.
Okay, async, super easy. You just go to this .async like you've seen in so many other libraries, and then you just call the done function when you're done. It's really super easy. Done, boom. So that's how you do async. Very easy if you need to do an async task. If your async operation fails, just put false in there, and Grunt will now know that your async task failed. Yeah? All right, that's it. Oh, I want to give you the repo. You can clap, go and clap. I like it. So there's the repo, github.com/my username, jcarella/custom-grunt-examples, and it's a much more full-featured example of the two tasks I just showed you. That's it. Everybody got the link? Going to disconnect it. There it goes.